church was birthed out of the atonement. John, 1 John, chapter 2, verse 2. And this is interesting. Even Burkhauer, Hodge, others, they kind of make this, well, John says, and this is over the issue of propitiation. Propitiation is a word that should not be used in the scripture. To propitiate is to court favor back to something. The pagan Canaanites and the Amorites, through unclean worship at their temples, through offering children in sacrifice on their altars, were propitiating the gods. Never did God have to be propitiated to man. He was already on the side of man. So propitiation is a pagan term that came out of Roman Catholicism. So when you have a wrong view of the atonement, you won't understand the person and the work of the atonement, because the atonement is a person. And that's what John 2, verse 2 said. He says, no, he is atonement. I want to try to lay some foundations without getting too deep and too lost in the theology of it, to try to give you a plane of understanding today. Atonement is not something Jesus did. Atonement is not something that happened to him. Those are what are called extrinsic atonement theories. I would say, and it is my position, that the biblical position of atonement is an intrinsic atonement theory, meaning everything necessary for the redemption of man is found in the person and the work of Jesus Christ, meaning I wholly and wholeheartedly disagree with penal atonement. Penal atonement says that God punished the Son, so sins would be punished. The truth of the matter is sins already were punished. They stood punished from the garden. The punishment was stated to Adam before it happened. And I want to talk about that for a minute. He says, you may eat from any of the trees in the garden, but you must not eat of the tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When you do, or if you do, you will surely die. Okay. I want to share something, again, without getting too far off, but there is something very important. Part of the subject that we want to enter into, we're talking about atonement. And ultimately, what I need to get to for all of you and myself is what Priscilla and Aquila had to get to with Apollos. How do you get into the atonement? And what does it look like when you do? See, the problem is we're all fighting with what we've been taught. And we've been taught primarily Reformed theology did not start with Martin Luther and fall to Calvin, and then to Hodge, and then to Burkhauer, and then on down the line, and then to the Andrew Murrays and the Westminster Confession and all of the stuff that came out of it. It really began with a man about 1,000 years earlier called St. Augustine, or Augustine. And see, this is in reference to 1 John, and another issue. I'm going to just clear issues today about this issue of sin. The argument over 1 John today in Reformed thought is it says, well, 1 John says, if you say that you have no sin, then the truth isn't in you. So we're just all sinners, right? That argument of John was to the Gnostics of the day. The Gnostics of the day were saying, if you have not done your church history study, we don't have sin. Okay. Try to draw a corollary here. Augustine of Hippo, 400 AD, about 100 years after the Roman Catholic Church hijacked Christianity. basically. In 300, they took it over as the state religion. That's what happened. So it was only about 100 years into that. And this guy shows up on the scene called Pelagius. Pelagius, and there was a synod, and there was and he was determined a heretic. And I don't want to get into all that. It was a big thing, but Pelagius said that misunderstanding the law of kinds, that man didn't inherit Adam's sin, and that still he was primarily good. Okay. Augustine took great umbrage with that. They branded him a heretic. And by the way, Pelagius was wrong. He was absolutely wrong. When Adam sinned, he just brought forth kind, just like the fruit trees did and the animals and everything else. So here we go. Now sin has entered into the life flow of mankind. Okay. So when you get to Reformed thought, so basically almost all of Tulip, which didn't come out until the argument between Calvin and Jacobus Arminius, and the Synod of Dort in 16, 18, and 19, and the canons that came out of Dort basically came up with what we call Tulip today, which is, it's the acronym's all messed up. It shouldn't start with total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, or what they call is predetermined atonement. But again, out of unconditional election, you automatically get a limited atonement because it says you're saved and you're not. So where we left off last week is really talking about this issue of salvation and election. So you have this. I want to be an arbiter today. I hope you hear that. I am not against the man John Calvin or Martin Luther. I'm not against Pelagius. When you read Pelagius, he absolutely was wrong about original sin, but he said no man should ever sin. He should live absolutely holy before God. He just, like Apollos, didn't understand how to get there. And I want to say this today. We have the same problem in the church. We don't know how to get there. I have not known how to get there. So why am I talking about all of this Reformed church history and all of that? Because this argument has been going on in the church since the beginning, since John wrote First John, and the Gnostic heresies had already confronted the church of the day. We have a teaching in the church today through the Reformation, carried on by wonderful ministries like Ligonier, and I loved R.C. Sproul. I wish I would have met him. I feel like I've known him. I watched him and listened to him for years. I probably listened to every radio broadcast and every video he ever did 5 times. Never once did he convince me that he was right.